All right, I think we're, yep,
Yeah,
we're live. All right. Morning, everyone. Sorry for the late start here. So the goal of today's chat is to really talk about things that we don't like about the printer. I mean, no printer is completely perfect.
Yeah. So
Hold on. I have a background noise.
Yeah, don't worry, we can't hear much.
Hang on.
So yeah,
Right,
so just to talk about things probably that we're not 100% on that can be improved. There's not that many things, to be fair, but obviously it's going to help your build process if you're aware of these things, just to spend a little bit more time with these elements, because if they're not the best way of doing something, if it's not a great way, you want to get the best from that way, if that makes sense.
Yep, and so we'll get started here. And the best way is going to be probably to show you guys going through it. And so we'll probably switch off. Again, I'm shy. This time the guy with the beanie is calling with the English accent.
Yeah, Star Wars.
Easier. So again, change of venue here, so apologize for the mess. But what we'll do is I'll grab the camera here, and I'll do my best to try to swing it around and walk through some of the stuff on the printer that I don't like. Again, there's not much, but we'll get started, and then we'll probably just switch back and forth and call myself. So I'll start off really with my biggest pet peeve, which I know is probably opposite to Colin, but my frustration is this wades, and not necessarily the wades as a whole, but to me it's more of the hob bolt in combination with the 608 bearing, with this mechanism, the hinge mechanism, and the actual loading of the filament. If I let it focus, you guys can actually see what ended up happening down here. And I've had this happen twice. Now, in fairness, that might be happening because of the really old and probably very cheap PLA that I have, which I have had issues with before on here. And the slightly better quality stuff, or even Exovan, the more well-known stuff, is working fine. So it might be a problem with the PLA, but in general, my frustration with the wades, the way currently.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. Yours is different to mine slightly. I've got a slightly different setup to my wades. Now, the wades Shay's using is tough to use. The one I have has a filament feed at the bottom. I'm just checking. Yeah, has a filament feed at the bottom. Now, I've had to makeshift the connection to the frame with it. It's not ideal, but I've had zero problems in loading and unloading filament, zero problems with jumping a filament. So, but what you got to remember is, guys, I think a lot of it comes down to your quality of your hob bolt, and no one knows that because it's hard to see. A hob bolt's got grooves in it and that's it. They may be deeper than others, or I might have particularly got a really good hob bolt. It's hard to say.
Yeah, and I think that's part of my issue too. Is I don't think my hob bolt is very good. It's kind of Mark put it on in some of the pictures he posted. And I think the quality of my hob bolt is probably questionable to begin with, and probably the source of some of the issues I have. For the filament loading, as Colin mentioned, having that PTFE beforehand and guiding the full path is definitely hugely helpful. The guys coming from the Wanhao and the Flexion, we're spoiled there.
Just interrupt you quickly. I don't actually have PTA. I have printed plastic that takes, that's a printed tube that's part of the wades that goes all the way up to the hob bolt. And and half of it's cut away at an angle around the hob bolt. So the only time the filament is not actually surrounded by a print is when it's in contact with the hob bolt. So that's why it's super easy. My i3 is easy until I started using this wades that I have. So maybe I think what I should do is I should redesign the mount and put that out there for you guys to have a play with. I think because I've had zero issues with the loading and unloading.
Yeah, and I haven't had a huge amount of issues. I'm just very picky.
Yeah, of course. And loading and unloading a filament and breakage a filament and bends, that's a big deal, because the idea behind this printer is to be able to do big prints. So you're going to use more than a reel, or you're going to be halfway through a reel and then choose another big print and then use the rest. So if it's not working flawlessly, then there's an issue that it needs to be addressed.
Yeah, and what I'm going to do is actually, just in the process, instead of changing my wades over entirely, I'll keep using it, but what I'm going to do is actually going to switch. I printed up a whole box of different guidlers.
Yeah.
Hope you guys can see. So I have probably about 7 or 8 other different kind of idler guidlers that they're called. You know, most all of them with these U-holes on top here to make the to make this actually come off easily if you need to. But all of them have some sort of a filament guiding path. I don't know if you can see that very well, but they all have a guiding path to that filament. So I think that'll help, and that'll make the loading of filament easier.
Yeah.
The other part of this is that I've kind of learned is that this is supposed to be the one that we posted is supposed to be the accessible version.
Yeah.
So it's supposed to be that you can open it up entirely and then load up filament with the idler completely open, and then close it and then retension it. So
mine's not like that. Mine.
No, I don't either. I don't like messing with that tension. So I guess that's just we'll leave it off that. That's my frustration is the Wades. Again, I think it's good, and it certainly worked. I've done many big prints with it. Could it be better? I certainly think could be a lot better.
I think this is a prime thing where how just one little design tweak improves a part exponentially, which is why we sort of decided to do what we're doing here by building this printer, because these little tweaks that were made or have already made have made a huge difference. And it's hard to get across how just a small little thing like what we're talking about here in the Wades is such a big deal, and just a small design change will improve the quality of the printer.
Yeah, and if you look out there too, I mean, there's so many different extruder designs. There's so many variations on the Wades, right? I think it's what might work well for Colin and me, you guys might find for some reason doesn't work well for you, either because the hollow bolt is bad, or because your printed part doesn't have the right tolerance, or you just don't like that mechanism. So I mean, I think that's the nice thing, at least that we based it off the Wades, is that there is all these opportunities to change it. Or I mean, you know, you can just cave in and you know, buy a $100 extruder or two.
Yeah, I suppose what's the well-known extruder that comes all as a kit? I forget what it's called.
Well, I mean, that's what I thought. So for me, if I was going to buy an extruder, I've thought of a couple different options. One of them is the Titan.
That's the one I was thinking of.
Because it's a planetary geared. The Bondtech also has a good reputation for a Bowden. And then one day, eventually, maybe the Flex 3D shafted, or the Zesty Nimble, if it ever comes to fruition. So, but those are more drastic extruder type of changes. But you know, the Bondtech and the Titan are not too bad. They're about $100 each. And I do like that precision metal made parts. So I might go down that route too.
Yeah. Remember as well that's a valid upgrade once you get printing. Once you start off with, it's like everyone can pretty much print everything they need for the printer.
Yeah,
be up and running. So don't be put off. Oh, he's thinking about doing this, or I'm thinking about getting an actual proper commercial Wades, or whatever you want to call it, feeder, because you're still going to get great prints. We're just looking to really dot the I's and cross the T's.
Yep. Yeah, and then again, that's the goal, really, I think, too, is to get you guys a good quality working printer with printable parts, so that you don't have to go spend $100 on an extruder.
Exactly.
Off the bat, right? And I mean, I've gotten really good prints too, so I just know it can be better. Well, I don't know if you can. Bill's asking, can you show your feed tube setup?
Yeah, I may be able to. My actual cam's on my
if you want to take a picture and send it to me, and then I'll screen share the picture.
Okay, 1 second.
So while he's doing that, we'll bring it up in a minute. I'll kind of think of maybe if there's other stuff that I don't like too much. I think in my case, I mean, the foam box enclosure, I think you guys have seen plenty of pictures of it, but I'll turn around the show. Right? I mean, this is more of a cosmetic thing, to be honest, but I enclosed it to keep the heat in. And my original intention was going with black paneling, just to have a nice all black outside. And again, more cosmetic than I really think about this, but it actually does not work that well. I don't like the having the all black on the outside. I kind of miss having the insides of the printer exposed, all the colors, and you know, sort of all the work that I put into it. I really thought was cool when it was open frame, and now that it's kind of closed, I'm like bummed. So
yeah,
I think when I do enclose it, it is going to be the probably just a clear plexiglass. Or
I agree. I love that's what's put me off about doing an enclosure, because I was just going to do a cheap enclosure as well. I love the fact that I can see everything, and I love the fact that when I'm printing, I can get my head right round and have a look at all the angles. I know some guys might use cameras and I don't, so I love the ability to be able to sort of look at it from all angles. But like Shay said, the ultimate goal would be an enclosure, but see-through.
Yeah, and real quick, I'll just so we answer Bill's question here, I'll share the picture if my laptop doesn't crash again.
So right, if I talk you through it, I've got my pause switch, which is the big red first element at the bottom. Then you've got green PLA going into an oiler. And then just above the oiler, in front of the guider, you can see an entrance. Now that tube guides the filament all the way to the hob bolt. And literally it's cut out, so it goes over the hob bolt, in fact, as well. And then continues on up to the PTFE tube. So at no point is that filament have any way where to go but across the hob bolt.
Yeah, so I mean, you guys can see how that's a good design in the sense that it covers the filament all the way through.
It's super easy to feed new PLA in. I just push it up, pull the idler out ever so slightly, push it up, and it's in. And I can feed it manually really nicely.
Yep. And so, I mean, hopefully that'll be the intention that we get kind of with the Wades. You know, if Colin posts his, you guys will have that one too. You guys will have a choice between the two. But, you know, hopefully we can get the idler sorted out and make it easier.
Agreed.
All right. Look back. Hang on. Oops.
So we spoke about the enclosure. We spoke about the Wades. What about the bed?
So, I mean, for me, my frustration with the bed is just that it's bent. You know, I think at 5 millimeters might be slightly overkill. I think we can get away with 4 for the thickness of the bed, right? I think 3 is definitely too thin.
Yeah, agreed.
So I think, you know,
I'm on two minds there. I have 5 mil, and I've got precision machined 5 millimeter aluminium. Now, apparently, Shay's really struggled to get the same quality for a decent money in the States, but over here in Britain, it's very readily available. I paid about 26.
Yeah, and you guys call it EcoCast, right?
Yeah, EcoCast. It's fantastic stuff. It came with film on both sides. It's machined completely flat, and it's fantastic. I've got no bowl, no bend or whatever. And being 5 mils, there's no possible way I'm going to get that in the future as well. So for me, my bed is guaranteed flat. I could even bolt it in place at the level if I chose to. Now, the bed issues for me really are the supporting layer. I got a bit mixed up on Facebook. Those that were following it, I was commenting on Mark's build. It looked to me like he'd had a complete sheet across the 2020 frame, which was going to then support his bed, but that wasn't the case. He was just taking pictures of his actual printing bed just laid on top of his extrusion. Now, I feel the bed is very heavy, where I think we're on the tipping point of it being too heavy. Or you could even argue that it's too heavy now. So I think adding any more weight to that is a no-no. I feel we can improve it. I don't know how, but I think we'll have to sort of discuss. Maybe it could involve actually printed brackets that support the bed rather than aluminium corners. I don't know anyone that followed the Hypercube. He had some sort of printed parts that help support the bed away from the extrusion. So there's lots of different ways we can go forward, but
I don't
cut the weight down.
I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't change the corners to plastic, only because if this end up giving or swaying or sagging at any time, my worry would be that then it throws off the level. I mean, I like sticking to the aluminum corners. I think maybe a lower grade of aluminum, possibly going maybe to 3 mil aluminum versus 5 aluminum, you know, reducing the weight that way.
The more I was thinking of, I know what you're saying. If you had plastic like for like, where we've got aluminium, you would have an issue. I've sort of in the back of my mind been toying with a design idea where, because your bed is literally sitting above the extrusion, you could just have extended supports which rest on the extrusion. And if you're printing something like tubes as support, the support that they're going to give would be even better than the aluminium, so you would get no sag whatsoever.
Yeah. So yeah, and I guess
Lots of design tweaks, but for me, the weight of the bed is a big issue, because there's instances where if I was to switch my machine off when my bed was in the middle of its height, its printing height, one side will drop or both sides will drop, and the bed will start to lower itself because
mine drops every time I turn the power off.
So the way I've solved this, just a quick tip for you guys, is I either switch the machine off when either the bed's homed or when it's on the deck, because it's got a bit more pinch on the lead screws and it doesn't drop at all.
Yep. And then the dual Z-min that I have set up, at least.
Yeah, of course.
It solves any out of alignment issues that you might get because of that.
Exactly. And that's going to solve that 100%, in which case you don't really have to stress too much about where you switch your machine off at that point.
Yeah, but I agree with your point, though. It's frustrating to see the bed drop all the way down, when you're like, oh, I just wanted to stay where it is.
Yeah. When you're doing something, you actually think, oh, I'm just going to switch the power off because I've got a jam or whatever, and switch it back on and your bed's dropped. It's like, oh.
Yeah, I agree. So, I mean, for me, related to the bed, the heated bed, I have just recently moved it down to this messy room you guys can see, which is our basement. And it is a steady 25 C or about 75 Fahrenheit here. Yep. So I can finally actually, I think, start running tests on the dual zone and see, how well the single zone works, and at what temperatures it needs to be. My sort of thinking right now, and the frustration I have, is that if you just have the single zone on, just the inside of it, and you have your temp set to, let's say, 65 for PLA, what actually is happening is the heat dissipation into the rest of the aluminum means that the heater has to actually be on more often. I think that the temperature then becomes a little less consistent across the entire plate. I haven't measured it yet, but my thinking is if the thermistor's in the middle and it's set to 65. You guys lose me?
No, it's still good.
Okay, sorry, my screen popped up. So if the thermistor's in the middle and the heat is in the middle, and as it's dissipating away from that middle, I think there's a more gradual heat change that could potentially affect the outer edges of a 200 by 200 part. Whereas where you have the full bed heated, you have a very consistent temperature across the bed. So I'm still questioning the need for a dual zone. I mean, I like the power savings of it, but considering the more difficult, the increased difficulty in setting it up, the additional wiring, the switch, and the additional cost, still wonders in the back of my head, is it really worth that power savings that I'm getting being able to turn off the internal zone?
So what you're saying is, Shay, even when you just have the inner zone on, you're still having to heat the entire bed because of the heat's dissipating across it. So you might find where you'd have both zones on, you're heating up in 2 minutes. With just the inner zone, you're still heating the whole bed, but it might take 10 minutes to get it to a stable temperature. So you're not actually saving anything. I come up with, in back of my mind, a good design idea where you could actually have a 2-part bed. If you're printing on glass, you could actually have a 2-part bed with an insulator, and that 2-part bed could be the exact same zones as your heat zone. So you would have a heat break between the 2 beds. You would only actually be heating that zone. Yeah. But start getting into complex engineering at that point, but that's a possibility as well.
Yep. So I think the idea will work well.
My bed is cheap as chips, $24 silicon heat pad from AliExpress. Obviously, I've got the same issue. My heat pad is 30 by 30. My build plate is 40 by 40. I'm heating up exactly the same way. I'm heating up the whole bed, so it does take a little bit longer, but it's worked consistently and it's worked brilliantly. For me, the expenditure, after knowing what I know now, I couldn't justify unless I know 100% we have a cast iron system for the 2 heat zone, because 2 heat zone would be fantastic right now. When I'm printing a 20 centimeter, a 2 centimeter cube, I'm heating a 40 centimeter bed to print a 2 centimeter cube. So in that respect, it's not great. But again, it's just how you're going to use your printer as well. Like if you're printing big prints all the time, heating the whole bed up is not a big issue. But if you're going to be doing all sorts of bits on it, which I would assume you are, then obviously a dual zone would be better if we come up with a better build bed to suit it.
Yeah. And then I'll keep working on the tests, and when I have more time, and then kind of report back what I found. Let's see what else. Things that we don't like.
What about? what's about.
Well, I mean, so I mean, for me, the Z height, right? We're at about 365.
Yeah.
You know, I would have liked to be closer to 400, but I think it's inevitable just because the way that the hot end carriage is designed at the moment. I think because I have it set up lower. So I mean,
Well,
that is
that's
something
changeable, isn't it? You could drop your first level. You could drop your level down. You see the gap between the ground level and the first level. You could actually drop. Looking at my system, you could actually drop about 30 millimeters, which would then obviously mean you'd have to get longer lead screws and longer rods.
Yeah.
But you could gain that Z
Yeah,
height.
I mean, you could also raise the core XY level, I think, by another 25 as well.
Yes. Yeah.
So,
So in fact, you could probably achieve about 42, 44 centimeters. Right now, mine's a Frankenstein machine. I get about 390. But in time to come, I will be changing the X carriage, so I'll drop in the same as you. Talking of that, the lead screws, 8mm lead screws at the time was a design choice. Shay, I'm sure you agree, because they're easy to get hold of. Not ideal considering we're going 12mm smooth rods. If I was to build this again, I would adapt it to at least a 10 or 12 mil lead screw, just to sort of take the weight of that bed a bit more, like we were talking about before. But that would just be a standard upgrade. I don't think that's anything too complicated.
yeah, I mean, so I totally agree. I mean, that's one of my pet peeves as well. The 8mm certainly I think works okay, but I mean, it's kind of silly to me that we have 10 mil and 12 mil rods everywhere, and kind of this over-engineered big printer, and yet we're using the 8mm rods that are 8mm lead screws that are used on your small i3s.
To be fair, though, in fairness, considering I was talking about the weight of the bed, it is heavy. They're standing up fantastically. I've not had any bends or anything like that, so they're more than up to the task. But I feel it would just be a better, smoother system with fatter lead screws, or even a ball screw if you want to go to severe lengths.
Hey, so just going back real quick, Bill asked a question. I apologize, Bill, I missed. So he said, so I guess when you were talking about your bed, he said, so then could we do a 300 by 300 aluminum plate and help reduce the weight as well? I was wondering about heating a big plate with a smaller heater. I mean, Bill, you certainly could go with a 300 by 300, but I think that kind of defeats the point, right? I mean, it's at least on the X and Y, I'm getting 385 on or 395 on X and 425 on Y, right? So you can get at least 400 by 400. I wouldn't suggest going with anything less than a 400 by 400 aluminum plate. You certainly don't need to go with the 500 by 526 that I have listed, because you remember mine goes edge to edge across the whole aluminum. I don't think I'll ever be able to get to that very edge. I just like having that extra space on the edges just because of me, right? I'm thinking about this.
Mind, though, we do have ideas of wiping of nozzle systems and all that. And obviously Shay's extra space is going to allow him to sort of incorporate that a little bit easier than myself, because I think I was probably, when we first started building, I ordered my bed first, and 400 by 400, so I was bound to that. Where building now, I would go for the full size, and then I know I'm covered.
Yeah, so I mean, I agree. I think if you have to reduce the money and you feel like the weight's an absolute issue, then go for 400, but I would really not recommend it. I think Colin agrees there. I think go with the full size.
Bill's suggestion of maybe going smaller. If you did go smaller, which we sort of think defeats the object, you would have to increase the size of your triangle support, so around the frame.
Yeah, and I think Bill, maybe and I think Bill, maybe there's a chance you're confusing the 300 by 300. Is Colin's heat pad is 300 by 300. His bed is the aluminum bed is 400 by 400, whereas mine, I have a bigger aluminum plate at 500 by 526, and my heat pad is 400 by 400. So in both of our cases, our aluminum bed is about 100 millimeters in each direction bigger than the heat pad we're using. And I think, as Colin has said many times, I think he said his heat pad is fine. Right, Colin? I mean, would you buy a bigger heat pad if you
No, it would have to be, considering it was $24 for the 300 by 300, it would have to be in the realms of less than, I don't know, $30, $32 for me to say, okay, I'll go 40 by 40, because I'm not seeing any sort of performance issues or anything to that effect. It would be nice to have the full plate, but it's not caused me any problems. So the only way I would purchase a bigger silicon heat pad is if it was a reasonable price. Other than that, I would just stick with the 300 by 300.
And unfortunately it won't be, because the Kenevo is one of the few ones that make the 400 by 400, and that's at least $100.
Yeah.
Your 300 by 300 size is becoming more common with like the FolderTech FT5 and some of the other GMAX type of printers. So I think in time we'll find cheaper 400 by 400, but I think it'll still be 100 for a while. So okay, so Bill, hopefully that answered your question, and cleared up any confusion. I guess for me the next thing is really the pause, the film out of filament switch.
Yeah.
Not that it doesn't work well, right? It works fine. I've actually used it, and I'm not talking about the what happens once it's paused. I'm not just talking about mechanically and physically where it is. I would like to move this down roughly about maybe 30 mils down about here. If you guys saw in Colin's picture, he had it down low. I think that's a good idea. When I ran out of filament, the end of the filament was about right there, right in between the two, right?
Just keep in mind you've got a buffer on your printing procedures, so your print could carry on for a good while after it sent its command.
And that's my worry, I guess, is that what if it does have a lot of commands to go through or a big move, it might pull that last bit through, and then I have to then remove that PTFE tube on top, and it can become a little more difficult. So I would definitely like to move that further down. The downside is then the spool has to move down with it as well. So I'll sort that out in time as well.
To be fair, my spool is probably about 100 mils from the deck. The bottom of the small is about 100 mils from the deck. I don't quite know where you have yours mounted, Shay.
So mine here, you can see it.
Oh yeah, so you're towards the top or halfway, aren't you? Halfway.
Yeah, I try to put it about halfway. So I would, if I did mine, I would move it down here, roughly about to the lower section, and then I'd have it somehow going back up here, and then have this paused one probably about down here.
Yeah,
just to give it a good distance.
You've got the advantage that your actual wave feeds at an angle. Mine feeds vertical, so I had to have mine lower as well. So yours is a better design in that respect.
Yeah, yeah. So that's the other positives for these weights, but that's something that just the pause button. Otherwise, mechanically, the way that I designed it, I think it works fine. It does work well. There's no issues with it actually.
All right.
Sorry, did you guys lose me there?
No, we're still there.
All right, my device is going crazy here. I guess the other thing really is for me the way that this feeds on top. This is kind of like the Ultimaker or BC Sigma. Most of the Bowden styles will ride up and then come down on the side. It's fine, but if I ever wanted to enclose the top of it, I have to build an enclosure that goes up above that too, right? I would like to move this little wire mount here, if you guys can see it. I'd really like to move this wire mount possibly either down here even, or up here in the back somewhere, so that this nylon sleeve goes straight out over the bed, right? Similar to how Colin has his with the drag chain.
Yes.
I think that would make it really nice and clean up here, and be able to make it to enclose the top too. So that's one thing I would change there.
Yep. And the way my PTFE tube falls is it probably falls no greater than about 30-40 mil above the top level, so I could have an enclosure just lifting it up, say 50 mil to be safe, and then and enclose the whole lot.
Yep. And then thinking about the kind of the inside of the printer, I think you guys have seen pictures. My Raspberry Pi is actually set up inside the printer towards the front. I'm really not liking the idea of it being inside the printer, only because if I cut power to the printer, it also cuts power to the Raspberry Pi. So if I ever wanted to do things like with a relay to turn the printer on and off remotely, any other stuff like for a smoke detector or whatever, LED lights that are independent of the printer, I can't, because that Raspberry Pi is dependent on the 12-volt supply that's bucked down to a 5-volt from the main power supply that also powers the printer. So ultimately, I think if you're in that midst of building, kind of think about, things like Raspberry Pi and where you're going to set those up. If I had to do it quickly, I would just set it up outside and mount it to the back of the 2020, and just have it running off of its own, 5-volt, 2.5 amp USB power supply, and it'd be fine and dandy. If I spent a little more time on it, I'd wire up some sort of a 5-volt, 3 amp power supply and wire directly to the Pi, make it a little nicer. But in my case, my grand intention is also making the one Pi running Repetier server for multiple printers. So it no longer really makes sense for me to have the Repetier server be in the printer itself as well. So again, it works for now, but just kind of think about that as you're, if you are somebody that likes to print from a Raspberry Pi, via Octoprint or Repetier server or whatever, just think about that it's now part of the printer itself, and is that what you want going down the road?
Okay.
Right. What else?
Belts. Do you want to talk briefly about the belts?
Yeah. So I think we'll do a separate video specifically on the belt path itself. And that way we can get kind of in more detail about how we do the making sure that all the belt paths are in alignment to each other, and the criticality there. But I mean, Colin, you want to start off with your pet peeve?
Yeah, it was. I went rubber belts to start with, and I had to use a tensioner, which I wasn't expecting to do. Not that that's a big deal, but and then I found that my belt was being worn down for some reason. I assumed that was a leveling issue, but
no, that was you're talking about the steel belt. You were with rubber first, then you went to the steel belt.
yes, and now I'm on the steel, and I managed to. I was probably a little bit silly in installing them. I had to lever them over the last pulley, so I'm assuming I stretched them because obviously there's metal in there. And now so I didn't need a tensioner, and now I've gone back to a tensioner. Everything seems okay at the moment, but I'm still unsure whether the metal belts are any better than the rubber ones.
When you're still in the rubber, right? You went back to the rubber.
Me?
Yeah.
No, I decided to stick with them like we were talking.
Okay.
So I've only done a few small prints and a few trials of pause after print. And it all seems fine at the moment, and the tension hasn't changed. So once I do the next big print, which will be in the next couple of days, and I run out of filament, I'll find out. And then if the same happens again, I'll be going back to the rubbers.
And for mine, I mean, I've liked this steel. I've had it on there a while. I took a couple of hours to actually get it set up right and tensioned right, and I kind of wound it around. I didn't pull it over anything.
I think that's where I went wrong. I think I stretched mine initially, which weakened it. So, probably install it the correct way. You'll be fine.
So I think the rubber belt is more forgiving in the sense that you can kind of do it quickly and not be perfectly aligned, and it's fine. But I think the steel belt really requires that precision of making sure everything's aligned at the right level, and then also making sure that you're not over tightening it over a shaft, for example, because it will bend the stepper shaft if it has to, if you pull it too tight. So that evening of the belt across the whole path becomes very crucial with the steel belt. So I would still suggest if this is the sort of the first belt path assembly you've put together, stick with the rubber belt. It works fine. I don't really see any major issues with it. And it'll do you fine. You'll get that experience of putting the rubber belt together, and then just have that steel belt. It's only a couple bucks. Have it in the background as we get to talking about it more, and we prove that it really is worth the extra headache. Then you'll at least have it. And you can always swap it out later. It's not. I don't think it's too hard to swap out.
Okay. Agreed. Like, for instance, cost is not that much of an issue. I think the difference in cost between a rubber and a metal is hardly anything if you order them from Ali. So, yeah. So just get both is what I'd advise, unless you're on a budget.
Yeah, and I'm thinking of the carriage itself. I mean, just my pet peeve and more of not a big deal, but you guys can see the back of mine is a bit of a cluster with the wiring there. I'm just really anal, don't like that wiring, right? So I'm waiting to see what Mark comes up with, considering how nice and clean his wiring is. But I would like to build, more, maybe not cable management, because I think there's enough cable management, but more of cable hiding into the carriage itself too. I always like the kind of Ultimaker, that really clean look to the carriage. I always thought that's really cool. So I'm really excited to see maybe what you guys come up with to hide some of those wires.
Yeah, I think, to be fair, I don't think there's too much more unless you can think of anything that's.
No, I mean things like the lighting inside, because mine's all enclosed. I have some LED panels designed, and some ideas for wiring LEDs around the whole printer, so I get equal lighting throughout the entire printer. So I'll work on that hopefully the next couple of months or weeks. Now it's a little warmer down here. Get that LED lighting set up. I mean I really don't think there's much else. I mean, I know the bed leveling, now that I've have it set up with the nuts and springs, it's fine. the M5 springs that I was always recommending are not actually the right size. The spring itself just barely fits over the M5 bolt, so it's a very tight fit and doesn't compress very much. So I am on a bit of a quest, probably at the next hardware store visit, to go buy a bunch of different springs and just test them out and see. If I think it should be probably a 6 or 7 millimeter spring. I think that'll work fine. Probably a shorter one. So I'm going to play around with the springs a little bit and see if there's a better spring combination to use. But that's something maybe keep an eye at as you're getting to that part of the build. Maybe just run to the hardware store, grab some different size springs. Again, diameters I think would be about 6 to 7 mil would be fine. But height-wise, I think mine right now are at about 15. So I think maybe you want to go with a 5 or 10 millimeter height spring. Remember, you still want the compression. You just don't want you don't want to overly compress the spring, which was what I had to do. Otherwise, I would lose too much on the build height. So hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so. So yeah, I don't think there's.
There's just, Bill was asking a question: is he able to build beyond 300 by 300? Yes, Bill. The Heap Collins build plate is 400 by 400. So that's the build plate that's aluminum, right? 5 millimeters. His heat pad that's under here is 300 by 300. So he's still able to print the full 400 by 400. It just takes longer to heat up that 400 by 400 space because the heat pad under here is smaller. So hopefully that makes sense.
Spot on.
All right. I don't think there is much else. I think that's it. I guess being picky again, the LMKs, right? The LMKL, what the hell is it? LMKL 12. The bearings that we have on the 4 corners of the 4 posts, I think to me have a little bit too much slop. I don't know if it's just the way because they're made in China. I had a good discussion with Pierre about I think some Japanese precision made LMKs, which I think run about $8 a piece, if I remember right. So we compared, I think the $1.50 or so that the Chinese ones are. So I think he did buy the higher precision Japanese made ones. I'm curious to see what results he gets. But I do agree that I think maybe higher precision LMKs would certainly help in a bit of a tighter tolerance on the Z axis, or actually on the Y, so the bed doesn't do
I
this.
agree. I recently just built a different printer, smaller one, and I ended up adapting the bearings. So we both feel something probably needs to be done or improved, don't we, about the bearings for the smooth rods.
Yeah, to be clear, we're talking about the LMKs, right? The vertical ones are flanged, so you have a bearing like that, and there's a flange here on the bottom. So it's the LMK ones, the 4 that sit on the 4 corners of the 12 millimeter rods on the Z, right? We're not talking about the X and Y on the top core plane.
No. Everything on the X and Y, the smooth rods there is completely fine. The bearings are fine. There's no issues there, I don't think. In fact, when with changing my belts, I was actually surprised at how well it still really moved. With the belts off, you can freely move everything, and it was just fantastic. Do you know what I mean? You could breathe on it and it would move. So the system we've got on the XY does work well.
Yeah, that's about it. I guess the Bowden tube on mine, again, I'm just trying to find things to nitpick about, but they're not really issues. The Bowden tube on mine, you can see I have a little bit too much slack. Right, it's a little too long. It really should be more like that if I pulled it tight. So that slack is probably causing me maybe small issues here and there. So maybe that's just something to keep an eye out. When you're setting up your Bowden tube, try to keep it nice and tight. Not really a fault of the design, just a fault of me not taking the time to cut it right. Bill's asking a question here. Colin, I think we got through most of it. Which cables seem to be performing better? Bill, I'm not sure what cables you're referring to. It did remind me a bit. My biggest pet peeve, my biggest gripe of all.
You missed that one.
Forgot the ramps. My hatred for the ramps continues. I despise the ramps. I know people love it and they say it's great. Yes, it is a decent board. It does have plenty of pinout options. If I want to take advantage of every option I could possibly take care of in firmware, have multiple extruders, have multiple stepper extruders, have extra hot ends, yeah, the ramps is definitely the cheapest and the most expandable way to go. I completely agree there. But I hate the I hate the male DuPont pins on there. They drive me nuts. I've always had a problem with electronics where I just find my female DuPont connectors. It doesn't matter if they're high quality ones from here, from DigiKey or something, or cheap Chinese ones. My female DuPont connectors never sit tightly on the male DuPont connectors. They'll sit and they'll work, but with the slight pull, they'll come flying right off. So I've had a thermistor come off on me because I was messing with my fingers in there. I just hate the male pins and the female DuPont connectors. I hate that idea with a passion. I think there's plenty of better boards out there. Yes, they're more money. I won't go into details of which boards or which ones, but I just don't like the ramps. And if I was building another printer again, I would certainly use a different board that had better connectors on there, preferably screw-in blocks or locking connectors like the MKS or the Rambo has. I like those 100 times better than the connectors on the ramps.
Okay.
So sorry, that was my rant for the day on my hatred for ramps. Bill, I'm sorry, I still don't know what cables you're referring to. Trying to think which ones he could be talking about.
If it just means the wiring, then you just go with standard wiring.
Yeah, I mean that's my pet peeve, but it's not really an issue anymore. The 16 gauge, the 12 gauge wiring that I used in from like the power supply to the ramps, and then from the ramp or from the power supply to the ramps and the power supply to the heat bed. I mentioned early on, and it's in the BOM actually, is to buy the 12 gauge silicone wiring. The 12 gauge standard copper wiring is a pain to work with because it's so thick. I did manage to get it sorted out, and it is wired fine. I just don't like how thick it is and how hard it is to move, right? So I do suggest 12 gauge silicone wiring. Okay, so it looks like he's talking about the belts, rubber versus steel. Which ones seem to be performing better?
It's hard to say. I haven't used the metal ones long enough yet, and I probably didn't install them correctly. And Shay, did you go straight to metal?
Yeah, I had the rubber belts on there only for a week or two. So I do agree. I would say that I think the steel belts. I like the steel belts, but like I said before, I don't think I have any concrete evidence yet to prove and say that the steel belts are 100 times better. I'm finding that the corners to be nice and sharp on high speeds, but again, I haven't raised the acceleration jerk. So once I get time to sit with the printer and slowly start to bump up the acceleration and jerk, that will be the point where I can say, yes, the steel belts are definitely helping, because I know that the acceleration jerk that we have it set up today, which I think is 20 and 8.
Yeah.
That's good for the rubber belts, but I think with the steel belts, I should be able to go up higher. How much higher, I don't know. But once I am able to go higher, then I can say, you know what, yes, the steel belts are more worth it because you can get higher acceleration jerk, therefore faster printing speeds. And so I think, once I do those tests, I can then say with some evidence or some reason that the steel belts are better. I'll reiterate again that we think if you're starting off with a printer and it's your first build, start with the rubber belts. They're more forgiving. You can over tension them, you can under tension them, and it's not that big of a deal. You won't break stuff, and you won't break the belt. You won't break shafts. You won't break a bunch of things. So start off with the rubber. If you're not experienced yet in belt pathing and setup, once we have the videos and we have the instructions and we have the benefits weighed out, then go to the steel belts later. All right. I think that's it. Running out of breath.
Yeah, I think we'll call it there. That's a good session. Pretty much gone through most of what we've bought. So yeah, good stuff, guys.
All right, guys. Take care. Hopefully that was informative. Please ask any questions. We can elaborate on anything in the future.
Yeah.
Take care. We'll see you guys soon.
Later.